when the United States was just a weak colony and every day was a struggle. Today, the United States is known as the most powerful country in the world, but there was a time when it was struggling just to survive. No real power, no strong identity, only struggle. This story begins in the 1600s, when people from Europe started arriving on this land in search of a better life. This land was what we now call America, but back then it was not a country, it was a group of colonies under British control. At first, people believed they would find freedom here, but slowly, the truth became clear. Britain began imposing its laws, heavy taxes were introduced, and the people living there had no real say in decisions. Those decisions were being made thousands of miles away in London. Anger started to grow. People began asking themselves, why are we living like slaves in our own land? After 1765, things got worse. Britain introduced new taxes like the Stamp Act and the Tea Tax. The frustration grew so much that people finally took action. In 1773, a major protest took place, the Boston Tea Party. People threw entire shipments of British tea into the sea. This was not just a protest, it was a warning. Britain responded with more force. Conflict became inevitable, and then began the struggle that would change history, American Revolution. The first shots were fired in 1775. This was not a normal war. On one side was the most powerful empire in the world, Britain. On the other side were ordinary people, farmers, workers, with very limited weapons and training. But they had one powerful thing, the desire for freedom. A key leader emerged during this time, George Washington. He led the army under extremely difficult conditions. Soldiers often had no proper food, no warm clothes, and sometimes not even enough weapons. Many died from hunger and cold. There were moments when defeat felt certain, but Washington refused to give up. He reminded his soldiers that if they failed, future generations would never forgive them. Slowly, the fight became stronger. Support from countries like France helped shift the balance. Finally, in 1776, a historic decision was made, the Declaration of Independence. The United States was now a free nation. But the real struggle was just beginning, because winning freedom is one thing. Building a nation is another. There was no strong system, no stable economy, and no unity between the states. At times, it felt like the country might collapse. But in 1787, a new constitution was created, a system that would hold the nation together. Still, one major conflict remained: slavery. The southern states supported it, while the northern states opposed it. This division grew into a massive internal conflict, American Civil War. It was one of the most brutal wars in American history. Brother fought against brother. Millions were affected. During this time, another important leader rose, Abraham Lincoln. He stood firmly against slavery and fought to keep the nation united. In the end, the war was over. Slavery was abolished, and the United States remained one nation. But the cost was enormous. Millions had died. The country was broken. Yet from this pain, a stronger nation began to rise. 2-04, 2026, 04-29, Ashutosh Dubey. Now the real question was, would this country fall apart or rise stronger than ever? The Civil War had ended, but the nation was left shattered. Cities were destroyed, farms were burned, and millions of lives had been lost. But the biggest damage wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Trust between people was broken. The North and the South looked at each other with suspicion and pain. But even in this broken condition, something new began. The government started rebuilding the nation. This period became known as Reconstruction. It was not easy. Slavery had ended, but now millions of freed people had to find their place in society. There was resistance, there was violence. Many people refused to accept change, but slowly, step by step, the country moved forward. At the same time, another major transformation began, the Industrial Revolution. Factories started rising, machines began to take over work, railroads expanded across the land. The United States was no longer just a farming nation. It was becoming an industrial power. But this growth came with pain. Workers labored day and night, in dangerous conditions, for very low wages. Accidents were common. Machines crushed workers. Factories caught fire. Many people lost their lives. But the country did not stop. During this time, millions of immigrants arrived from Europe and other parts of the world. They came with hope, a better life. But reality was harsh. Cities became crowded. Jobs were limited. Poverty increased. Still, one thing connected everyone: the dream of a better future. Meanwhile, the country itself was expanding. New lands were acquired. People moved westward in search of opportunity. But this expansion was not peaceful. Conflicts broke out with Native Americans. Their lands were taken. They were forced to move. This remains one of the most painful and controversial parts of American history. Yet, the nation kept growing. Railroads connected distant regions. Trade increased. Industries expanded. Money started flowing into the economy. Now, the United States was slowly becoming one of the world's largest economies. But internal struggles were still not over. Workers began to protest. They demanded better wages, safer conditions, and fair treatment. Strikes spread across cities. Sometimes, protests turned violent. Workers and authorities faced off against each other. Tension was rising, but these struggles were shaping a stronger system. Laws were introduced. Working hours were regulated. Basic rights began to emerge. The country was not just growing. It was learning. By the end of the 19th century, a major change was clear. A nation that once seemed broken was now standing united again. It had industries, it had wealth, it had people, and most importantly, it had the hunger to move forward. But the world outside was changing rapidly. Powerful nations were preparing for conflict, and soon a global war would begin. A war that would test whether the United States was truly ready to step onto the world stage. But now, a time was coming when internal strength alone would not be enough. The world was changing. In 1914, an event took place that pushed the entire world into war: World War I. Major European powers were at war. Germany, Britain, France, Russia, all were fighting. This war was unlike anything before. Machine guns, poison gas, trench warfare lasting for months. Thousands of soldiers were dying in a single day. But where was the United States at this time? It was watching from a distance. At first, the United States chose to stay out of the war. It wanted to focus on its own growth and stability. But slowly, things began to change. Germany increased its submarine attacks in the Atlantic. Ships were being sunk, even those carrying civilians. Anger started growing among the American people. Then came another turning point: the Zimmermann Telegram. Germany secretly tried to convince Mexico to join against the United States. Now, the war was no longer distant. The threat was getting closer. In 1917, the United States made a decision. It would enter the war. But there was a serious question. Was America ready? European nations had been fighting for years. Their armies were experienced and battle-tested. The U.S. military, however, was smaller and less experienced. Still, America had something powerful: resources industry and the ability to mobilize quickly. Within months, the United States began building its military strength. Factories started producing weapons day and night. Trains carried soldiers to ports. Millions of troops were sent to Europe. And when American forces arrived, the energy on the battlefield changed. European soldiers were exhausted, but American troops were fresh, determined, and full of momentum. Slowly, Germany began to weaken. In 1918, the war came to an end. And for the first time, the world realized the United States was no longer just a nation. It had become a global power. But the story did not end there. After the war, Europe was devastated. Economies were broken. Cities were destroyed. But the United States? It came out stronger. Its factories were running. Its economy was growing. And now the world depended on it. Then came the 1920s, a time often called the Roaring Twenties. Cities were booming. Technology was advancing. People were making money. Everything seemed perfect. But Behind every rapid rise, there is a hidden risk. In 1929, everything collapsed. Great Depression. The stock market crashed. People lost their savings. Banks shut down. Millions became unemployed. A nation that was rising fast was suddenly in crisis. Families struggled to survive. Homes were lost. Hope was fading. It was one of the darkest periods in American history. But once again, from struggle, strength began to rise. The government stepped in. New policies were introduced. Jobs were created. Slowly, the nation started recovering. And this time, it had learned something important. Power does not come only from weapons. It comes from economy, people, and strong systems. But the world was heading toward another storm. A war even more dangerous than before. And this time, the United States would not just participate, it would lead. But the world was heading toward another devastating turning point. In 1939, war broke out again. World War II. This war was even more dangerous than the first. In Europe, Adolf Hitler had risen to power and was rapidly expanding German control. In Asia, Japan was growing its military strength. At first, the United States stayed out of the conflict. The country was still focused on rebuilding and strengthening itself. But then came the moment that changed everything. December 7, 1941. Attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan launched a sudden and devastating attack on a U.S. naval base. Hundreds of aircraft, thousands of soldiers, and massive destruction within hours. This was not just an attack. It was a strike on America's pride. The entire nation was shocked. And then, united. Now the United States had only one choice: war. But this time, America was not entering the war just to fight. It was entering to win. The United States mobilized like never before. Factories began running 24/7. Women joined the workforce in large numbers. The entire nation stood together. Thousands of tanks, millions of weapons, and one of the largest military forces in the world was built. From Europe to the Pacific, American forces pushed forward. Slowly, Germany began to weaken. Japan started losing ground. But the war was still not over. Then came a decision that would change history forever. 1945. Atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 2 atomic bombs. One dropped on Hiroshima, one on Nagasaki. In seconds, entire cities were destroyed. Millions of lives were lost. It was one of the most devastating moments in human history. But soon after, Japan surrendered. World War II came to an end. The world had changed. Europe was in ruins. Germany was defeated. Japan was weakened. But the United States? It stood at the top. It had unmatched military strength, a powerful and growing economy, advanced technology, and the most dangerous weapon ever created. Now, there was only one true superpower: the United States. But the story did not end here. A new kind of conflict began: Cold War. A long struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union. It was not a direct war, but a constant battle for influence, power, and dominance. An arms race began. A space race began. The world was divided. And during this time, the United States achieved something historic: Apollo 11 moon landing. For the first time in history, a human stepped on the moon. And the world saw this nation was not just leading on Earth, it was leading beyond it. Slowly, the Soviet Union weakened, and in 1991, it collapsed. Now, only one superpower remained: the United States. This is not just a story of power. It is a story of struggle, of survival, and of rising again after every fall. The United States did not become a superpower in a single day. It was built through pain, war, sacrifice, and determination. Now tell me, did America become a superpower just because of its strength, or because of the struggles it survived?